2 children dead. A crash with no attempt to brake. A pair of identical twins, one behind the wheel, the other ready to take the fall. A desperate cover-up that almost worked. But the truth always surfaces. The road was painted in blood. Shattered wooden fragments of the horse-drawn carriage were strewn across the asphalt, mixed with splinters and debris. A lifeless horse lay twisted unnaturally, its body contorted in a way that defied logic. Its neck was broken, its mouth slightly open, as if frozen in a moment of confusion. Among the wreckage, 4 children lay motionless, 2 of them beyond saving. Their small bodies were flung onto the roadside, their limbs bent at unnatural angles. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood and the distant wail of approaching sirens. A silver SUV sat at the roadside, its front crushed beyond repair, windshield shattered into jagged edges. The impact had been brutal. No sign of braking, no effort to swerve. It was a direct collision, as if the driver had not even noticed what lay ahead. The first responders rushed to check on the victims. One of the children, an 11-year-old boy, had no pulse. Beside him, a 7-year-old girl lay lifeless. The other 2 children showed faint signs of life. One had a dislocated shoulder, his face smeared with blood, while the youngest barely clung to consciousness. 2 women stood near the wreckage. One was visibly shaken, dressed in a Hy-Vee supermarket uniform. Her blonde hair was slightly disheveled, her hands trembling. The other woman, identical to the first in appearance, arrived shortly after. She was calm, detached even, observing the scene with a strange sense of detachment. They were twins, Samantha Jo Petersen and Sarah Beth Petersen. By 8:26 a.m., law enforcement was on site. Officers immediately began questioning witnesses. The horse-drawn carriage had been making its routine trip to school when the SUV came speeding down County Road 1. There were no signs of an evasive maneuver, no attempt to slow down, just a violent, unforgiving impact. The driver of the SUV had been identified by onlookers as a blonde woman wearing a Hy-Vee uniform. That should have been the end of it. But then came the second woman, identical in every way, who claimed she had been the driver instead. Something was off. Sarah Petersen quickly stepped forward, admitting she had been behind the wheel. Her voice was steady, her story consistent. She insisted that she simply hadn't seen the carriage before it was too late. But as officers examined the scene, they noticed an unsettling discrepancy. Sarah had no injuries. A crash at this magnitude should have left its driver with bruises, if not lacerations from the broken glass. Yet, she stood there unharmed. The vehicle, however, belonged to Samantha. For law enforcement, the situation was no longer a simple case of reckless driving. It was something more, something deliberate. One woman was lying. The question was, who? Investigators noticed the tension between the 2 women almost immediately. Sarah, the one claiming responsibility, seemed uneasy, but determined to maintain her story. Samantha, standing slightly behind her twin, kept her distance, her eyes darting between the officers and the wreckage. It was an unusual dynamic, one sister stepping forward too quickly, while the other remained unnervingly silent. The officers examined the vehicle. The deployed airbags were stained with blood. If Sarah had been the driver, she should have shown some injury, scratches, bruises, at the very least, some impact from the crash. But her face was unmarked, her hands steady. Samantha, however, had red marks on her arms and small cuts on her fingers, details she kept hidden beneath clenched fists. It was a discrepancy that couldn't be ignored. A patrol car parked nearby had its recording system running. What should have been an ordinary background audio file captured something unexpected. Unaware of the recording, the twins had whispered to each other. The voice, low but clear, came from Sarah. "They'll never be able to tell us apart. They won't know who was driving." It was an admission, subtle but damning. Authorities took immediate action, seizing both of their phones. Digital evidence had become one of the most effective tools in modern criminal investigations. People, especially those in a state of panic, often underestimated how much their phones revealed about them. Calls, messages, location history. Every action left behind a trail. Sarah's phone contained nothing unusual, but Samantha's device painted a different picture. Shortly after the crash, she had messaged a contact at her workplace. "I messed up. I killed 2 people. They were just kids. I hit a carriage. I wasn't thinking. I wasn't sober." The timestamp placed the message mere minutes after the impact, long before Sarah arrived at the scene. Security footage from the Hy-Vee parking lot confirmed it. Samantha had left the store at 8:02 a.m., driving the silver SUV. The crash occurred at 8:26 a.m. The timeline aligned too perfectly for Sarah's story to hold. Further analysis of Samantha's phone revealed search history that only deepened her guilt. In the hours following the accident, she had searched for legal consequences related to vehicular manslaughter. Phrases like, "What happens if you hit an Amish carriage and kill people?" "How to lock an iPhone if the police take it?" and "If you cause a fatal accident, do you go to prison?" left little room for doubt. Investigators began reconstructing the sequence of events. Samantha had finished her shift that morning, her system likely still clouded with drugs and alcohol from the night before. Surveillance footage captured her movements as she exited the store, her steps uneven, her gaze unfocused. The drive home should have been routine. Instead, it became a straight path to disaster. Speed calculations estimated that her vehicle had been traveling between 63 and 71 miles per hour at the time of the crash, well over the 55 mile per hour limit. The horse-drawn carriage had no chance of avoiding the collision. The children, having no seatbelts or structural protection, were ejected on impact. The force had killed 2 instantly. When Samantha realized what she had done, panic set in. Her first instinct was not to call for help, but to call her sister. Sarah, perhaps out of loyalty, perhaps out of obligation, agreed to go to the scene. Whether it was an impulsive decision or a calculated one, the lie took form the moment Sarah arrived. They assumed their identical appearance would shield them, but panic breeds mistakes. Samantha hadn't thought about the details, about the security cameras, about the injuries that didn't match, about the text messages that placed her at the wheel. The illusion of control slipped through her fingers with every piece of evidence uncovered. The deception was failing. It was only a matter of time before the truth unraveled completely. As the investigation progressed, the weight of evidence against Samantha grew impossible to ignore. Every detail, her injuries, the security footage, the phone records, pointed to her as the driver. The attempt to switch identities with Sarah had been reckless, born out of desperation rather than careful planning. It was not the act of a seasoned criminal, but of someone who had no other way out. And yet, the deception had nearly worked. Sarah had been willing to take the blame. She had stepped forward without hesitation, placing herself between her sister and the inevitable consequences of the crash. It was a decision that could only be understood in the context of their past. The Petersen twins had lived in each other's shadows for years, their lives intertwined not just by blood, but by circumstance. Samantha, the older of the two by mere minutes, had always taken on the role of protector until their roles reversed. Sarah's history told part of the story. She had spent time in jail before, a brief sentence that left her struggling to rebuild her life. During that time, it had been Samantha who stepped in, taking care of Sarah's young child, making sure there was still some stability in the family. That debt, unspoken but deeply felt, had been what brought Sarah to the crash site that morning. She hadn't arrived as an observer. She had arrived as a substitute. Law enforcement now faced a new challenge. While the physical evidence pointed to Samantha, Sarah's confession had complicated the case. The system relied on factual proof, but also on the words of the accused. If Sarah continued to insist that she had been driving, it could delay or even obstruct the path to conviction. But the police weren't relying solely on her statements. A search warrant was issued for Samantha's home. When officers arrived, Sarah answered the door. She claimed that her sister had already left, that she had moved out following the crash. But a sweep of the house revealed the truth. Samantha was still inside, hiding in a back room, attempting to evade arrest. It was a final, futile effort to delay the inevitable. The moment she was in custody, her blood was drawn for testing. The results only confirmed what had long been suspected. Even days after the crash, methamphetamine, amphetamine, and delta-9 THC were still present in her system. The substances had not fully cleared from her body. On the morning of the accident, she had not just been reckless. She had been impaired. A key piece of evidence came from an unexpected source, a social worker at the local school. In a routine follow-up with Sarah's 13-year-old daughter, the girl made a quiet but devastating admission. Her mother had not been the one behind the wheel. She had heard the conversations, seen the aftermath. Sarah had arrived after the accident, not before it. The case was no longer built on speculation. Samantha had driven the SUV. She had been under the influence. She had killed 2 children and tried to manipulate her own sister into taking the fall. In early February 2024, formal charges were filed. Samantha faced a total of 21 counts, including vehicular homicide, driving under the influence, and reckless endangerment. The legal consequences would be severe. The potential sentence stretched to a decade behind bars. Sarah, despite her role in the cover-up, was given a chance at leniency. She was charged with 16 counts, but accepted a plea deal, reducing her sentence to 6 months in jail and 4 years of supervised probation. It was a calculated decision, one that spared her from harsher penalties, but did not absolve her of wrongdoing. For Samantha, there would be no such agreement. The weight of the evidence ensured that she would stand trial. The proceedings were set for July 2024. The tragedy had unfolded in an instant, but its consequences would last a lifetime. 2 children were gone, their futures erased in a moment of reckless indulgence. Their families were left to mourn, to grieve not just the loss, but the senselessness of it all. And at the center of it stood 2 sisters, one who had tried to escape her fate, and another who had nearly sacrificed herself to save her.